All right, looks like it's finally working. Always a little dubious of how well YouTube will work, but seem to do the job all right today. Just adjust the seating and get ready to do a little R&R, Rashi and Rashbam. Hope that everybody is having a fine day as we dive into our Torah portion. And we are picking up in chapter 16 with the rather alarming title of Acharei Mot. Acharei Mot literally means after the death. And as we're going to see, this is going to resume the narrative-ish from Parashat Shmini, where the two sons of Aaron died. But it is also going to introduce a new level of detail that is most famously understood as being Yom Kippur. There's a lot more going on here, but that's why we've got our commentators to help us navigate this. So let's go ahead and get started as we always do, which means with the Torah first, and then we'll turn to the commentaries. So chapter 16, verse 1. Excuse me. Adonai spoke to Moses after the death of the two sons of Aaron, who died when they drew too close to the presence of Adonai. So this is, as I mentioned before, a timeline marker, and reminding us that this conversation is definitively coming following the passing of those two sons of Aaron who died in the rather unusual circumstance of Parashat Shmini. Just a reminder that in general, the Torah does not usually give us such clear indications of before and after. It's a very famous principle, in fact, that the Torah should not always be thought to be presented in a strictly chronological order. Here, we do, however, know that this is definitely coming after that event. Now, you might be expecting then that there will be more conversation about the passing of those two boys, but it doesn't seem like it. Adonai said to Moses, "Tell your brother Aaron that he is not to come at will into the shrine behind the curtain, in front of the cover that is upon the ark, lest he die. For I appear in the cloud over the cover. Thus only shall Aaron enter the shrine, with a bull of the herd for a sin offering and a ram for a burnt offering. He shall be dressed in sacral linen tunic, with linen breeches next to his flesh, and be girt with a linen sash, and he shall wear a linen turban. They are sacral vestments. He shall bathe his body in water, and then put them on. And from the Israelite community, he shall take 2 he-goats for a sin offering, and a ram for a burnt offering." Before we continue with that description of the sacrifices, I just want to point out the swerve that happened in the line on line 2 here. We are anticipating a discussion of the death of the two sons of Aaron, but instead we get instructions to Aaron for himself about not going into the Holy of Holies whenever he might feel like it. And then we get exactly how he should enter the Holy of Holies. Then from there, we are into a discussion not just about the Holy of Holies, but also about a particular chain of sacrifices and animals that are going to be involved in a very important ritual. So we're going to need to look at some commentary to figure out how this all fits together. Because right now, if you are just reading it plain, it may feel very much like a non sequitur. And you may also be missing certain nuances in the text that equally are there to give very important guidance and instruction. But I do want to go a little bit further into the text before we get into our commentary. Verse 6, Aaron is to offer his own bull of sin offering to make expiation for himself and for his household. Aaron shall take the 2 he-goats and let them stand before Adonai at the entrance of the tent of meeting. And he shall place lots upon the 2 goats, one marked for Adonai and the other marked for Azazel. Why Azazel? What in the world is that? Well, that's why we've got commentary coming up. Aaron shall bring forward the goat designated by lot for Adonai, which he is to offer as a sin offering, while the goat designated by lot for Azazel shall be left standing alive before Adonai to make expiation with it and to send it off to the wilderness for Azazel. Aaron shall then offer his bull of sin offering to make expiation for himself and his household. He shall slaughter his bull of sin offering, and he shall take a panful of glowing coals scooped from the altar before Adonai, and 2 handfuls of finely ground aromatic incense, and bring this behind the curtain. He shall put the incense on the fire before Adonai, so that the cloud from the incense screens the cover that is the ark of the pact, lest he die. All right, we're going to pause there. It continues on with more of the ceremony, but I want to make sure that we can get at least this far in our commentary. But I wanted to show you that this does eventually loop back to where we began, which is to say that this whole ceremony with the cow and the 2 goats, one for Azazel, is all part of the process of preparing Aaron to be able to enter into this Holy of Holies, the innermost section behind the curtain that separated the Holy of Holies, where the Ark of the Covenant was kept, from the rest of the Mishkan, and of course from the rest of the courtyard, and of course from the rest of the community. So this is all in aid of that process. Now, why is he doing that? Well, like I said, this is generally seen as we go through the rest of the verses, which we may or may not get a chance to do together, as being the nucleus of the ceremony known as Yom Kippur. But let's go back to the beginning here and see what our commentators can do to help us understand what's going on and why we're being given these instructions in this particular way. So let's begin with Rashbam here on our left, who has a very straightforward explanation of why this is Acharei Mot, after the death. God told Moses to warn Aaron so that he would not die, as his sons, that he would not die as had his sons because of unauthorized entry into the temple. Of course, as is usual for the commentaries, they'll often use the word temple, even anachronistically here in the time of only the Mishkan, because the rules governing each section of the place of worship were the same. So Rashbam is trying to say that as we've already lost 2 of Aaron's sons due to their errors in how they offered up and came close to God, then God is now making that very clear as being a warning when a new set of instructions is being given of exactly how you can step into that space. To make that even more poignant, Rashi is going to bring a parable from Sifra, from the Halachic Midrash. What is this statement intended to tell us? Meaning, why is it at all stated when God spoke this to Moses? Meaning, we didn't need to have verse 1 at all. We could have just had, and Adonai spoke to Moses and said, you know, this is what you should tell Aaron about coming into the Holy of Holies. We didn't need the preamble about this taking place after the death of the sons. As always, whenever reading commentary, try and think, what question was this comment coming to try and answer? What problem in the text, and again, problem means our problem in the text, is the commentary coming to resolve? And here, it is the fact that it seems very unusual and unnecessary. Therefore, it must be necessary for some reason. Well, Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah illustrated this by a parable. It may be compared to the case of a sick person whom the physician visited. He, meaning the physician, said to him, "Do not eat cold things, nor sleep in a damp place," basic health advice when somebody is not well. Another physician came to him and said, "Do not eat cold things, nor sleep in a damp place, so you may not die, as Mr. So-and-so died." Certainly this, meaning the latter doctor, put him on his guard more than the former. That is why Scripture states, after the death of the 2 sons of Aaron. So Sifra is giving us this midrash of trying to say, yes, It could have just said, don't die when you do this, as it does in verse 2. But having reminded Aaron of the passing of his sons, it will ensure that Aaron and all subsequent high priests will be much more on guard when they are performing this ritual. By giving a concrete example of what can go wrong, in addition to the actual rules that are meant to be followed, it is much more persuasive. And that is something that I think all of us can appreciate. Should we follow rules, whether they be the mitzvot themselves, of course, or whether they be other policies and rules for our society and life, just because they have been given by those with the authority to give? Well, yes. On the other hand, are we more likely to be careful and punctilious in the observance of those rules if we know a little bit more about the full consequences and have object lessons of what goes wrong when the rules are not followed? Well, we're human. And as humans, we unfortunately will listen better when we have more information about those consequences. And, God understands that we are human and will often take extra steps to try and ensure that we are able to live our best life, even though we are human and subject to those problems. Now, moving on to verse 2 with our two commentators. Let me just get them into position. Begin with Rashbam to start. According to the plain meaning of the text, we are told that God would become manifest by means of the cloud, which hovers over the spot where the lid of the Holy of Holies, Holy Ark is situated within the tabernacle. Right? That's the basic idea. Don't come because don't come however you feel like, but come properly, because with the cloud, this is how I will be revealed. Compare, though, Exodus 25:22, where God told Moses, I will speak with you from above the Kaporet, from the area between the two cherubs. Again, it seems to be matching that quite clearly. If the priest would see this area with his own eyes, he would die. Therefore, when he would enter the tabernacle, the Holy of Holies, on the Day of Atonement, what we call Yom Kippur, to burn incense and sprinkle the blood of the bull and ram of the sin offering on the dividing curtain, which was coming along further along in our chapter, the cloud would first wrap the entire tabernacle into darkness, so that he would not be able to see what he was not allowed to see. So this creation of the cloud is an essential element to be able to allow the high priest to enter and have this experience, when without it, he would be in a very difficult situation. Now, Rashi, as is normal, is going to bring a little bit more information on this, because that is the style of his commentary. So the first one, sort of summarizing all of verse 2, is that we don't want Aaron to die as his sons have died. Again, continuing on from the teaching from verse 1, that this threat to his life is an echo of the very recent event of the loss of his own sons. More specifically, the phrase that he will not die, for if he comes into the Holy of Holies at any time other than Yom Kippur, he will die. As you can see from what we read in the more of chapter 16 than verse 2, the way that he will be going in will involve that bull, the two goats, and all of the details of their sacrifice. Well, that system is only in place on Yom Kippur. Therefore, as the halakha is deducing quite clearly from this, therefore, going into the Holy of Holies was a one-time-a-year event. It only happened on Yom Kippur. That is, it only happened on the day when the rest of those circumstances were also in place. The other bull, the other goats, and all the other things of chapter 16. And then to focus on the cloud aspect of verse 2, Rashi teaches that within the cloud I will appear means, for I constantly show myself there with my pillar of cloud. And because the revelation of my Shekhinah, the Hebrew term for God's presence, takes place there, he should take care not to make it his habit to come there. This is the literal meaning of the verse. So that is the basic understanding, that don't come into this place and casually, that this has to be only done with this very specific ritual, because the essence of the Shekhinah is palpably present in this place at all times, and thus you can only come with the proper ritual of Yom Kippur. The halachic explanation is he shall not come into the Holy of Holies except with, that is to say, on the occasion when he is going to raise a cloud of incense on the Day of Atonement. So even with regards to Yom Kippur itself, there is a very particular ritual that he must follow for this to happen, involving the way the cloud of incense will cloak this moment. Now, before we go on to the commentaries in general, right, yes, I forgot about that just a second. Oh, close that and click there and put back on the Hebrew version. So I just want to draw your attention to the Hebrew that's happening here in the Rashi, because he is making explicit something that is implicit in many of his other commentaries, which is there are multiple layers of understanding to different verses. You'll notice that the first half of his commentary here, it finishes with the phrase that this is the literal meaning of the verse. Literal, I have a bit of an issue with. The Hebrew word is peshuto, and that is more commonly referred to, without the whole conjugation, declension, and all those other wonderful Hebrew aspects, as the pshat. Now, pshat, I don't like calling literal. I prefer straightforward as being a good English analog. So what Rashi is saying is that it is the straightforward meaning, without any additional delving or plumbing the depths of its connection to the rest of Torah and the rest of Halakha, that the basic straightforward meaning of this verse must be that he shouldn't come in just willy-nilly. This is not a casual encounter that he is supposed to have. The second part of his commentary, though, is introduced with the phrase midrasho, or midrash. Now, many of you, I am sure, are familiar with the term midrash, and I am also confident that some of you, at least, are familiar with the term midrash as being almost a synonym for rabbinic story or parable, which is a really terrible way to think of midrash. First and foremost, midrash is an understanding of the text at a deeper level, that this is a drash, literally a midrash comes from the same root word, that this is an explanation of how this piece of text fits into the broader body of Torah and Jewish life. And as you can see, here the midrash is not some story. It's not Abraham smashing idols with a stick, one of the most famous midrashim that people often are aware of. Instead, this midrash is a very technical, what we call midrash halakha, analysis of the verse that will yield a very practical, very concrete way that we need to live. In this particular case, the high priest needs to live by having the cloud of incense be generated in just the right way, in order that he will be able to stand before the Holy of Holies on Yom Kippur and not die. So by a careful reading of the text, in that cloud I will appear, and then the rest of what happens in chapter 16, we are able to deduce more than we would from just the peshat, than just the simple reading of the text, only with the understanding found in just the words in that verse. So that's just a very simple and hopefully, I hope, a very clear understanding of the difference between peshat and midrash. And if you think of those two in that way, you'll be able to get through a lot more of what our commentaries are trying to tell us, and appreciate that they are not inventing ideas, they're not stretching for connections, but instead they are looking at the entire body of Torah as being intimately linked and in balance, often in ways that are not superficially or straightforwardly apparent to us. But when we take the time to examine under the surface, we can see those linkages. So midrash is not an invention. It is not a story. It is not just parables and sermons. Midrash is that deeper anatomical investigation to see the full extent of how every part of the Torah is connected to and informed by every other part. Okay, hopefully I didn't confuse things too much, and we will move on to our look at verse 3. Let me just go ahead and get Rashbam ready up for 6, but he has nothing to add to his grandfather's commentary for verse 3, so let's go ahead and stick with Rashi. So here he comes with this bull as a sin offering. What's going on here? Well, bezot is an unusual beginning to this word. An unusual word for the beginning of this verse. And thus only shall Aaron enter into the shrine. That thus seems perfectly natural in the English. It is not completely natural in the Hebrew, or at least it can work, but why is it being put in? Well, here we get a different type of midrashic understanding. Here we are seeing that bezot has the numerical value of this word is 410. Numerical value means, and unfortunately this word has been ruined in modern world, the gematria of the word. As Hebrew is a alphabet, it is also a number system. Aleph is 1, bet is 2, and so on and so forth through each of the letters. There's a different rule once you get past 10, but I'm not going to go through the entire list now. Now, gematria, as I say, has been a bit ruined in the modern world because, boy, howdy do people who want to say crazy things love the idea that you can reduce Hebrew words to numbers and then find other Hebrew words or ideas that seem to match those numbers. One of the most famous, of course, is the idea that the word chai is equal to 18, which is why we often will do things with the symbolism of 18 as a symbol of life. It's a nice teaching. It's wonderful. It reminds us the importance of life in Judaism. No harm done there. But when you hear people start trying to use gematria to make outlandish claims about Jewish practice, or as is more common, outlandish claims about current events or the future as they try to prophesy, this is where it becomes really cringe-inducing that people are abusing this system to try to justify anything they want that has no justification in the text otherwise. So please be careful. Anytime you hear somebody using gematria, recognize that this can be a red flag. Rashi, of course, well, first of all, Rashi didn't invent this particular insight. This comes from the earlier strain of sages. But Rashi, of course, is a safe source. He is someone that is drawing from the core of our traditions. And even though not everybody agrees with what he chose to bring, it is still worthy of discussion. So with that little caveat about gematria out of the way, what does this gematria of 410 actually matter? Well, this is an allusion to the 410 years during which the first temple existed. So here we get our next kind of connection. We had the Peshat, we had the Drash, and now we're also learning about what's known as a remez. A remez is, I think, well translated here as allusion. It is a hint of something else. It is not as tightly bound as a midrash. It is not as superficially connected to the text as would be a pshat, but it still has a strong pedigree behind it of saying, that actually does make sense. It seems insightful. It makes me think and feel the implications of the text a little bit more deeply. So that's what's known as a remez. And here we're seeing the idea being that this seemingly superfluous bezot is coming to give us a hint that the first temple would last 410 years from its establishment by Solomon to the destruction by the Babylonians. And that 410 is the 410 years in which Aaron would enter, not Aaron, but which the high priest would enter the Holy of Holies and stand before the ark. Now you might be asking, well, why is that only referring to the first temple? Well, that's because by the time of the second temple, the Ark of the Covenant was not present. As such, this ritual was not carried out in identically the same way. So the 410 for the first temple was a unique window in our history, represented by this bezot, by this 410 word. All right, moving on to the second insight on verse number 3. More fully with this will Aaron come into the holy place, and this also shall not be at any time he pleases, but on the Day of Atonement, as it is explicitly stated at the end of this section, meaning at the end of chapter 16, in the 7th month, on the 10th day of the month, you will fast, and the priest will make atonement or expiation. So, as we have been discussing, and I've hinted at a number of times, it's clear from the remainder of chapter 16 that we are talking about Yom Kippur, and here it is made even more clearly explicit in Rashi's commentary. Okay, moving on to verse number 4. And I'm going to remove the Hebrew over here because otherwise we run out of space far too fast. Okay, so here we have that reminder of how the high priest will be dressed, and Rashi, I think, will draw your attention to something. This teaches us that he must not officiate in the interior, meaning the innermost chamber of the Holy of Holies, robed in the 8 garments which were the insignia of the high priest, in which he performed the service outside, meaning in the outer chamber as well as the overall courtyard, and in which there was gold interwoven. You may remember from our discussions back in the book of Exodus of how those garments were made, because the prosecuting counsel cannot become the defending counsel. Instead, he should present himself in the inner chamber in the 4 garments, as found in Exodus 28:40, like an ordinary priest, all of these being on this occasion entirely of linen, whereas one of the 4 worn by the ordinary priests, the belt, was a mixture of wool and linen. So what Rashi is drawing our attention to is the fact that in this list of what he will be wearing in verse 4, it's not what we would expect. It is first and foremost not the garments of the high priest, the Kohen Gadol. So how do we understand this change of clothing? Why would the Kohen Gadol be dressed differently and less splendidly than he does on a regular day? When he is normally officiating, he is wearing the most beautiful of garments, and here he is wearing the most simple of garments. Indeed, even something that is normally made of a wool and linen blend, which is allowed only in these particular circumstances, but that's a whole nother conversation, here is being made entirely of linen. So it is the simplest possible garments that he could wear. Now, what's the explanation that's given? Well, that's this idea of the prosecuting counsel cannot become the defending counsel. What this is trying to hint is that on Yom Kippur, when he is going into the Holy of Holies, he is acting first and foremost in that particular place as our defending attorney, that he is there to say to God, forgive them, make atonement for them, allow them to not be punished this time for their transgressions, for they have repented and their transgressions should be forgiven. And so to do that, he has to come in the garments of the simple defendant, and one that is also defending himself, rather than wearing the more flamboyant clothing of the one making the prosecution, of making the charge. Most of his time, for the other days of the year, he is standing as essentially a judge for the people. Here, however, he is appealing himself before the judge of all, and as such, he has to be dressed differently than he is on the other days of the year. Again, one of those beautiful insights that comes from reading the text carefully and then allowing our commentaries to help open our eyes to things we might miss. Now, speaking of things you might miss, on Yom Kippur, it is customary, and Rosh Hashanah as well, in the modern world, well, actually quite some time, for us to, in some ways, reenact this particular presentation of ourselves. That is to say, on the high holidays, it is customary for people to wear simple white garments. You'll often notice that I and the chazan, the cantor, will wear what's called a kittel, which is a simple white robe. But that is not a rabbinic garment. That is not a clergy garment. That is a garment that can be worn by anyone. And to wear a kittel is to help put yourself in the right frame of mind. Now, I know, modern world, many people are uncomfortable with dressing that differently from modern clothing, and that's perfectly fine and normal. The kittel was much closer to the normal wear of people when it began to be used, and so we've kept a hold of it, but I understand that it's not a familiar or comfortable garment for many people in our current fashion world. Wear something else that is simple and white. I know many people will like to use the high holidays as a chance to make themselves look wonderful as they see family and friends that perhaps they haven't seen for a very long time. And certainly the joy of being with others is a great emotion, but don't allow it to overshadow the emotions of the days that we are there for. Allow the Yamim Noraim to still be days of awe, and certainly how we choose to wear our clothes, how we choose to dress, makes a big difference in that emotional preparation for the day. So if you want a kittel, let me know, and I'll be more than happy to point you in the right direction. If you're interested, however, in just dressing simply, do so. It doesn't have to be all completely white, but something that is trying to put yourself in the right frame of mind, and a more plain version of what you would otherwise be wearing is a good place to start. Moving on through Rashi's commentary from verse 4, and he shall put on the linen garment of holiness, meaning or of the sanctuary. This means that they shall be purchased from the temple treasury. While his personal offering mentioned in verse 3 has to be his own. So again, the Midrash Halacha is looking very carefully and saying, what do we mean by this will be the garment that is Kodesh? What is that term being used here? Why is it Bigdei Kodesh, these sacred vestments? That means that they are sacred because they are the garments of the Mishkan. They are the garments of the temple. They are the garments of the place of holiness. They are not his personal garments. They are not his. This is the ownership tag hanging off of the clothes, if you will. And it's important to realize that this is not him as him. In fact, there's a very complicated dance as we see throughout chapter 16. This is the Kohen Gadol both being himself, but also being the representative of the community, of the nation. And in this way, as he wears these garments, they are not just what he pulls out of his closet. These are the ones that are provided through the collaborative efforts of the community. However, as Rashi points out from Sifra, this is contrasted with the bull that he brings, which is his own bull. That is his own sacrifice, his own offering. And as such, it's not paid for by the community. That it comes out of his own pocket, as he is seeking atonement for himself and his own household individually. Now, like I said, there's this dance of speaking both for himself as well as for the community. And these are two of the steps in making that dance work. And then as we continue on with this Yitznof, understand this as the Targum does, that this is what is placed upon his head. Then there is more of the grammar, which, as we have established, we generally don't go into very deeply. And then finally, with this idea of him washing with water, or in using the good old English that this particular translation of Rashi loves, to lave in water. That's where the word lavatory comes from. But yes, this is just washing is perfectly fine in modern English. That day, he requires immersion at each change of his garments. As Rashi will put together for us from all of the different sections, 5 times he proceeded alternately from the service in the interior to the performed outside and from the outside service to that in the interior, changing from the golden garments into the linen garments, or from the linen garments into the golden garments. At each change, he required to take an immersion and to wash his hands and his feet twice from the laver, from the wash basin. That is, before he took off the garments what he was wearing and after he put on the others. So in all, he is going to wash 10 times during that day. And there's a much longer discussion of that in the Talmud, in the citation there, Yoma 32a. Just a reminder, if you're watching this and not actually having Sefaria open for yourself, you can always click on these links and that will take you to see much more about that particular topic. It's one of the things that I love most about Sefaria is that it instantly satisfies that curiosity of, well, wait, what did the Talmud say about that? And then, oh, the Talmud said this. Well, wait, what does Rashi say about that in the Talmud? Is it more in depth? Is it covering other ideas, or what is the halacha from that? It's the great part of Sefaria is that it allows you to chase down all those different questions and ideas much faster than pulling the books off the shelf. Don't get me wrong, still love books, still got a wall of them, but when curiosity is really firing and all of that passion is going, it is definitely more satisfying to be able to just find all of those different links and track them down. But I digress. Okay. And then we catch up with our commentaries in verse 6, where Aaron is offering up his own sin offering. Oh, sorry, before we go on to verse 6, I wanted to also mention just again that what we see here in Rashi's commentary from verse 4 about the change of clothes back and forth between when he is outside and when he is inside, again, is all part of this dance of Aaron's different roles on this day, or indeed the high priest's different roles on this day. It is meant to ensure that he has the proper frame of mind in each step that he is undertaking. Okay, so back to verse 6, where he is offering up his own sacrifice, and where let's get the commentary again. So the first thing is where it says, and he will offer up his sacrifice. Well, Rashbam wants to solve a very simple problem. Where is this happening? The Azara, it's in the courtyard. Just to make sure that we understood that, yes, this bull of sin offering was not made in the Holy of Holies, even though we've been talking about that a lot in the first few verses of chapter 16. This sacrifice is taking place in the normal place where sacrifices happen. And then this idea of the bull for the sin offering, he will immediately pronounce his personal confession over the animal. According to the plain meaning, the pshat of the text, he will bring it into the courtyard in order to sacrifice it as atonement, as explained by the line, and he will slaughter the bull of the sin offering for his personal atonement. Again, as our commentators were often inclined to do, they will sometimes help us understand one verse by referring to a later verse that will provide additional context. It's always the difficulty of reading any book is that sometimes one sentence will only make sense with what comes later. That's just how language works. We only get information one line at a time, and sometimes we need later information to help us with earlier things. And Rashbam is going to bring that for us here to help us understand just what exactly is taking place with this bull offering. And it is a sacrifice on behalf of the Kohen for his own transgressions, which means he has to follow the normal rules of those types of offering. In this case, making the statement, the vidui, the confession of what he has done, of the sins that he has made, in order to make that expiation. And Rashi has his own twist on this, that Aaron shall offer the bull of sin offering, which is his, that is, that mentioned above, back in verse 3, and it teaches you here by adding the words, that is his, that it means it had to be purchased from his own property and not from the money of the community, like we've already talked about. And that it will make atonement for himself and for his household. What this means is he shall make confession over it for his own sins and for the sins of his house. So that, again, is a very close echo to what we see in Rashbam. Moving on to verse 8 in Rashi. and getting Rashbam ready up. Oh, let's get verse 8 centered on our page. So now we come to this trickier conversation of what do we mean by Azazel? What are we talking about when we say Azazel? Or indeed, is that even the right way to be thinking of it? Is it a thing? Is it a place? Is it an idea? What's going on here? Well, let's take a look at how Rashi gives us a first look at this concept. He places one goat at his right and the other at his left. He then puts both his hands into an urn and takes one lot in his right hand and the other in his left. So it's literally like a lottery. And he is reaching in and grabbing with his hands to match whichever one will fall on which, the two goats that are standing before each of his hands. These he places upon them, meaning the goats, one upon each of them. The goat upon which there fell the lot bearing the inscription Ladonai, for Adonai, was destined for the Lord. And that upon which there fell the lot bearing the inscription La'azazel, for Azazel, was afterwards sent forth to the Azazel. Still a strange phrase here. So obviously the second half is going to cover that in more detail. Just make sure we get the mechanics down, that there are these two lots, and he has to place them upon the goats. And the mechanics of that are to reach in at the same time into the pot, pull out the two lots in each of the hands, and then put them on the goats and see which one matches which. And then you know the one on the right is the Azazel, or the one on the left is for Adonai. And then they go and deal with them as each are meant to be dealt with. But what do we mean La'azazel? What do we mean sent to Azazel? Is designated for Azazel? Is sent to the Azazel? It's a little blurry, and that's okay. So Rashi's first stab at this, and we're going to look at this also a little bit later on too, in Rashbam. The word is taken to be a compound of the word for strong and the word for mighty. That is not unusual in Judaism to take two Hebrew words and to blend them together. And even though it's not a letter for letter, and certainly not a vocalization for vocalization parallel, it is still considered to be within the same ballpark of meaning. So one part could mean strong, the other part can mean mighty, and it was a precipitous and flinty rock, a towering peak. That this was an actual geographical location called Azazel, that was the mighty strong rock. And as it is said in verse 22, and the goats shall bear upon it their iniquities into this craggy land. And they're saying here from the Talmud in Yoma that this craggy land is also known as Azazel. So Rashi is presenting the opinion that Azazel is really a geographical location, that is just a particular place where this goat is going to be taken and dealt with. Let's get into verse 9 as well, because although Rashbam is also going to talk about this, it is about in verse 10. So let's get verse 9 out with the idea of what happens to the goat that's actually being designated for God. So this one is going to be used as a chatat, as a sin offering, and made into a sin offering. Well, what does that mean? It means when putting the lot upon it, he names it. He designates it for that purpose, using the words to the Lord as a sin offering. So why is it saying that this is going to be made into a chatat? Why not say that it is offered as a chatat? Because at this stage, it's just making sure we have a designation, that it is going to be labeled as such, designated as such. And that is of great significance in Judaism. Once something has been designated to be used for a particular sacrifice, then it's not easy, or in many cases possible, to change that designation. Okay, now let's go back to our conversation about this idea of one goat for God and one goat for Azazel, and we're going to look back over here at Rashba as he begins his explanation of this concept. According to the plain meaning of sending it off for Azazel in the wilderness, it means to dispatch it alive to the goats in the desert, similar to the one bird of the two birds offerings in Leviticus 14 being released live into the open spaces. So Rashbam, as is his norm, says, look, superficially, it seems like when it says it's being sent out to the wilderness of Azazel, that what this means is the goats just being left to go out to the wild goats in the wilderness. The same way that when we were talking about the Mitzorah, the person suffering from Tzara'at, often mistranslated as leprosy, that one of the birds is just released, and we don't care exactly where it goes. We just sort of have expectations. So too, this goat is going to just return. That seems to be the superficial understanding of this verse. Now, the purpose of the procedure is to ritually purify the afflicted person from his ritual contamination, meaning with regards to Metzorah, with the pseudo-leprosy. Here in our verse 2, where we're talking about Yom Kippur, the purpose of the procedure is to cleanse the entire Jewish people from the ritual contamination which they have been in by releasing the scapegoat to the desert, this goat for Azazel, to an area where it can find grazing, as we know from Exodus 3, where Moses had taken his father-in-law's sheep into grazing land behind the desert. According to the Talmud, in Beitza 40, the meaning then would be that it was a style of domesticated goat. So this would support the idea here that the word the wilderness doesn't really mean the desolate desert region, but instead is a domesticatable region, a region where some domesticated animals can get by grazing. So it's a slight play on words, if you will. And Rashbam is saying that's really the most superficial, simplest way to understand this idea, that just as the bird is released in order to make atonement, or rather to cleanse the Metzorah, so too this goat is let to go wander off into the not exactly fully inhabited, but also not completely a uninhabitable area, and just do what goats do off in that zone. Because we already know that zone was the kind of place goats could graze because, well, that's what made Moses come down there in the first place, and what allowed him to eventually encounter the burning bush, and the rest is history. So this is not an explanation according to the halacha. In the halacha, the goat is handled very deliberately, not allowed to just wander off like a bird. But Rashbam, as is his style, wants to give us the superficial understanding so that we can hold on to what the verse seems to imply just by itself. However, he does have one little grammar question that we need to talk about. I know I don't normally bring grammar in, but it is, I hope, something that will be a little more accessible and still very interesting. If you will give me a second to take a sip. So it is said that this animal will be sent la'azazel. And he wants to know about that la at the beginning, that lamed that's hanging out at the front. So the letter lamed at the beginning is not an integral part of the word. So his argument is that lamed is not an actual part of the word. It is like the letter, and then he gives other examples here from Hosea 10:14, where the word is really derived from the shorter root, as in Deuteronomy, and he prepared an ambush for him. Again, I'm not going to go into all those details because I just find it more confusing for most of the students. So the letter we are speaking about is similar to the letter mem, which sometimes appears at the end of the word, instead, in this case, like rekam, instead of the word rake, that it's an unnecessary. It does not add to the meaning of the word. It's just a variant spelling. Similarly, Examples are of apparently redundant letters are the letter nun, and then he gives a list of examples of where the nun can show up at the end of a word but have no meaning to the word, and the word can and should be understood even if that nun weren't there. And in verse 22, the place is called Hadmibara, right? The wilderness, and in our verse, it's called this this Eretz Zera, this totally arid land, one that can not choose a crop. It is literally cut off from all goodness. So he is trying to say that sometimes the spelling of words can be more confusing than they need to be, that sometimes that extra letter is actually just a spelling variation and can be ignored when trying to interpret what's actually being implied by that text. Now, if I didn't completely lose you, let's go ahead and take a look at Rashi for verse 10. I just realized we didn't do Rashi on 10. It's already running off to 11. So Rashi wants to focus first on this idea of the animal being presented alive or standing alive. That this phrase Yomad Chai is the same as Yuomad Chai. That the conjugation pattern here is the same as the more regular conjugation pattern that we might expect, what's known as the Uf'al Binyan, the conjugation pattern. I'm not going to get into Hebrew. I'm so tempted because I love the way the Hebrew conjugates things, but suffice it to say, in Hebrew, through the use of changing vowels, as well as a few helper letters, words conjugate in ways that are very different than we're used to in English. The root letters are just the consonants and the vowels are the helpers. Enough. It shall be made to stand by others, meaning that this is a passive form of a causative action. It will be made to do something, in this case, stand by others, meaning other people are the ones standing it up. It's not standing itself up, which would really just mean in modern English, it shall be placed. The Targum, the Aramaic translation, also renders it by it shall be made to stand in a live state. Why is it stated that it shall be presented alive? This is already implied in the word of Yomad, right? Why add the word chai, meaning life, after we've made the word stand? After all, it can't stand if it's dead. So the chai seems redundant. So why? But because it continues, it's to send it forth unto Azazel. And I would not know whether this sending forth means to death or to life. In the latter case, it might just mean to let go. And he references back our same discussion that we had with Rashbam from chapter 14, where we are handling Metzora, where it has that meaning of being sent forth alive. Therefore, scripture states, it shall be presented alive. Its presentation must be made while it is alive, and the animal remains so up to the time when it is being sent forth. It follows, therefore, that it shall be sent forth to death. So it's a little confusing, so let me try and unpack that in language that hopefully will make more sense. The inclusion of the phrase, it will stand alive, is there to help us understand what happens after this part of the ritual is completed. If that word were absent, if it just said it will be stood up as they make atonement, then I might think that it will be handled exactly like the bird. Indeed, that was Rashbam's argument, was being the superficial, the Peshat understanding of the verse. But Rashi here is bringing that other layer of Midrash, found here in Sifra, and saying, no, because of that word chai, we can now juxtapose it to what happens with that bird, whereas the bird was handled while it was alive and then released to go off and be alive and do whatever. Here, the fact that it is being said it must be alive at this stage implies that it will not be alive at a later stage, that there is going to be a final moment in this ritual for the goat. In this case, it happens out in the wilderness rather than at the altar, but the goat does not go off to live just a casual goat life the way the Peshat might have led you to believe. And the way we know that, says Rashi, is by this inclusion of the word chai. That helps narrow it down that it's only alive at this point, but it will not be alive later on. Hopefully that makes some sense. And then Rashi will finish off this verse 10 discussion, that he may make an expiation with it, that he will do atonement with it. It will be for lechaper, that he, the high priest, shall confess upon its head Israel's sins. As it is said later on in verse 21, and Aaron shall confess upon it the iniquities of the children of Israel. So we understand that this animal is a part of the expiation process, a part of the atonement process that was carried out through Yom Kippur, that it was not it did not have some other purpose or motive, that this was what it was doing in the ritual. All right. I think we're going to have to wrap it up there because we've only got 3 minutes left, and that is not enough to begin the additional commentary. So thank you as always for joining me and for participating. As always, please feel free to email any follow-up questions or pipe up at any time during the discussion. If you do not have the Zoom link for some reason, please let me know and I'll be more than happy to resend that. While I know many people enjoy the convenience of watching it at their own time on YouTube, there is something to be said for studying together at the same time. And of course, that will allow you the opportunity to ask questions in real time. But I'll take them even after the fact too. Take care, everyone, and continue your studies.